right. Thank you for coming on this Monday. We put together an increasing student agency webinar today that we are happy to be walking you through. We just want to thank the NHED as always for our partnership with them that allows us to present these webinars to you for free. Just so you know, everyone is going to be muted. So if you have any questions, please ask them. You can put them right into the Q&A. It's both myself and Heather Jenkins today, so we'll be able to feed those questions to each other. And if you have information that you want to share, because a lot of times we have a lot of great resources we get from you all, that if you want to put that in the chat section and then everyone can see it, that'd be great. And as always, tomorrow, 24 hours, we say 24 to 48 hours after this slide deck, you will receive a link. This will give you your PD certificate for attending today, a video of this webinar, the slides, and other materials and resources that we have included in this webinar. And then as always, there's going to be a brief survey at the end of this webinar. We love hearing and listening to your feedback. So if you could take a few minutes just to fill that out, your feedback is always appreciated. So my name is Marissa Hooper. Myself and my colleague Heather Jenkins is here. We will both be delivering this webinar to you all.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
And then we also have Kristen Crawford. I don't believe she's here, but we always love to include her as our contact person for the NHED. Her information will be at the end of the slides, so you can always reach out if you have any questions to her as well. This is our agenda for today. We have a lot. Oh, it skipped over.
I knew it was. I'm so sorry, Chris. I knew it was taking a second, and it
That's
didn't go.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so really our essential understandings for today is we really want to make sure that we understand what what teaching methods we can use to encourage our students to be agents of their own learning, and how we can ensure that we understand how student engagement applies to student agency. So really how engagement and agency go hand in hand, and how we can use that to help build our student agency. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to go through types of engagement and student agency, and using data to support that student agency. And then towards the second half, we'll be able to share resources and things you can do in your classroom to get started. So I'm going to shut my camera off just so you have more room on your screen and we can get started. So we wanted to first just talk about the types of engagement, because we do want to understand how that kind of goes hand in hand with student agency. So we have cognitive engagement, we can have emotional engagement, and we can have behavioral engagement. So really, we're just going to talk a little bit about what each of these looks like and how they differ for students. We just want to give an example of what it might look like to be cognitively engaged in the classroom. So we just have some examples here. So if we were in a high school biology class, you might be teaching a challenging concept or introducing that to students for the first time. And instead of just lecturing for students, we want to facilitate a discussion where students actively analyze, ask questions, and propose hypotheses. And so what we're doing is we're allowing students to be engaged cognitively because they're able to think critically about the topic and apply their knowledge. And they're also able to participate in problem-solving activities. So really, we're shifting from engagement to strategic. Oh, I'm so sorry. We're really shifting that engagement so that students are able to cognitively be involved in the classroom. We also have emotional engagement. So for an example, we could be, in a middle school English classroom, and, we could be doing all sorts of things with reading, but for this example, we're going to talk about introducing a novel that deals with themes of loss and resilience. So, in order to begin this, we want students to explore an emotion wheel to better understand the many ways people might describe emotions related to themes in the books. So, this type of emotional engagement for students will not only enhance their understanding of characters in the text, but can create a shared language to discuss strong emotions in the classroom. It's going to help students, identify situations that maybe they can relate to. So it's really going to kind of trigger that emotional engagement for students. And lastly, we have our behavioral engagement. So for sorry, having trouble today. In an elementary math class, a teacher can implement a hands-on activity to teach fraction concepts, which we know students can definitely struggle with. So we want students to be able to work in small groups, and they can construct varied representations of a whole using manipulatives. So the teacher, we can encourage collaboration and active participation by circulating around the room. We can offer guidance and we can praise student efforts. What this does is this allows for multiple right answers for students and multiple representations, which can really help give an access point to students, which can really help with that behavioral engagement. So they're able to manipulate objects, they're interacting with their peers and they're applying those mathematical concepts and principles, and they're doing it in a tangible way. We wanted to show you this Schlechty's levels of engagement video. We thought it was great in showing that there's different levels of engagement, and a lot of times we might think students are engaged because they're on task. That doesn't necessarily mean students are actively engaged in their learning just because they're doing what they're supposed to. So we wanted to show this video, and then we'll talk about it a little bit, and it's pretty short.
Select these levels of engagement in less than 5 minutes, I promise. If you watch this scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you'll notice that even in the midst of a boring lesson, none of the students are actually misbehaving. They're quiet. Nobody's tossing spitballs or playing those paper football games or checking their cell phones because, well, the cell phones back then were the size of a brick. Remember the Zach Morris phone. But most of the students are essentially following the rules. They aren't engaged. But what are they? Well, some seem to be retreating, a few seem to be playing the game of school, but nobody is actually committed to the learning. Well, here's where Schlechty's levels of engagement becomes helpful. It provides a useful framework for thinking about what it means for students to be genuinely engaged in their learning. Schlechty defines it this way. Engagement is active. It requires the students to be attentive as well as in attendance. It requires students to be committed to the task and find some inherent value in what he or she is being asked to do. The engaged student not only does the task assigned, but also does the task with enthusiasm and diligence. In 2002, Philip Schlechty developed a framework for thinking about student engagement based on two core ideas of attention and commitment. At the bottom, you have rebellion, which involves diverted attention and no commitment to the task. This is the student who seems to be acting out and causing disruptions, and as a result, they fail to learn from the task. Next, you have retreatism with no attention and no commitment. Unlike the rebellion, this student in retreat is not actively disrupting the learning, but instead seems to be kind of checked out. This student is often distracted and emotionally withdrawn from the task, and as a result, this student learns little or nothing from the task. At the next level, you have ritual compliance. This involves both low attention and low commitment. Unlike retreatism, a ritually compliant student doesn't completely check out, but instead is doing the bare minimum to avoid confrontation. This student will learn at a low level, and the task will not be retained over time. Next is strategic compliance. Often this looks like engagement because the student might be performing at a high level, but it's not. Here, the student has high attention on the task, but low commitment to what he or she is doing. This is the student who is playing the game of school, focused on things like grades, parental approval, rewards, and class rank. But the learning isn't intrinsically rewarding, and as a result, this student will often learn at a high level, but fails to retain the learning over time or transfer it to a new context. And then finally, you have engagement. This requires both high attention and high commitment. Here, a student completely buys in out of a strong sense of intrinsic motivation, and this includes meaning and choice and challenge. This student will continue focusing even when the task gets more complex and challenging. And often they're going to choose to learn even when it is ungraded. This student will learn at a deep level and the transfer will continue to new contexts. And this is why it's important that we as teachers focus on how to make the subject intrinsically engaging. And this happens when we tap into student curiosity and creativity and purpose. And when this happens, students are more likely to grow into passionate, lifelong learners.
So this is that graphic that we saw in that video where really we want to make sure if we're looking at engagement and that strategic compliance, we really want to shift from that shift from engagement to strategic compliance is really that low commitment. And anything below strategic compliance, the issue with all these is that there is no student transfer, or they're not retaining anything. So it's really important that we get them to that engagement so that that transfer can happen.
Whoa, sorry.
Like,
It's sourced right there, so sorry.
And he talked about having that intrinsic motivation, which can be really difficult as teachers. We find that, it's really hard to build that intrinsic motivation in students if they don't already have it. Just a little bit about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. When we think about intrinsic motivation, that's really our students being motivated by internal factors. So they genuinely are enjoying a task that you've given them. They are interested in learning about, a specific concept. And there's also opportunity there for personal growth for them. And I know it can be hard for all these because we know students aren't going to enjoy everything, that they do. They might not know that there's an opportunity for personal growth there. We're going to talk in a minute about how we can kind of build intrinsic motivation in our students. And really, those extrinsic motivation are those actions influenced by external factors. So, hopes of gaining a reward. If you have a system where students can gain something, that's really them being motivated extrinsically. And if they want to avoid an outcome that they know is going to be negative. So these are just a few ways that you can help build intrinsic motivation in your students. So definitely, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is incorporating their interests in a subject. Like we said, students aren't going to love every subject that they take part in. But if we can try to incorporate any of their passions, so really getting to know our students and incorporating any of their interests into our lessons, the way we introduce it, an image, a project, however you can, allow students to see how this is related to an interest that they have can be very helpful. Definitely having student voice and student choice. So making sure that for voice, we're allowing students to share their ideas, any thoughts or feedback that they have, or their personal experiences, and making sure we're frequently giving them the opportunity to do so. And we also want to encourage opportunities for choice. That can be, and we want to say informed choice in our lessons, in our activities, where students have the opportunity to make a decision that's going to help them be more interested in that particular task. We want to make sure we show relevance of what we're teaching. So we need to make sure that we're applying the lesson material to real world situations so students know exactly why they're learning what they're learning. And we can also help by explaining how a concept or a skill is going to help serve them in the future. We've talked in some of our other webinars how, when it gets to sort of that high school grade levels, it can be more difficult. But making sure that we're not answering any of those questions in a way that's just, for students to earn credits or move on, that really we can talk about that these particular skills or concepts, there's a reason we're learning them. We want to help foster a growth mindset in our students. We want to ensure that, all of our students that with time and practice, they can improve their skills. They have the ability to learn, they can do it. They need to believe that as well. And, not only us telling them that they're competent and capable, they need to know they're competent and capable as well. So kind of, fostering this environment where they can really make sure they believe that. And we want to make sure we build their confidence. Now, technically, if we're praising them, this is an extrinsic motivation. However, what this will do is this is going to build a sense of pride in students, which turns into an intrinsic motivator. So really it's building that intrinsic motivation, even though it starts off that way. And that's just acknowledging all small victories a student or class or whatever may make. And definitely celebrate how far your students have come, no matter how big or how small any growth students make. It's so important to celebrate that and acknowledge that for students. So for our instruction, our class periods, really the elements of that are going to impact our engagement, specifically the cognitive, emotional, and behavioral engagement, is the purpose of our lesson, the task that we choose, the context in which we're delivering this lesson or teaching our students, those extrinsic and intrinsic motivation factors for students. Are they getting a reward for something? Is it a grade? Or is it something that they really want to learn more about? The level of choice that we offer our students, the relevance to what we're teaching, the skills and concepts, and then the confidence that our students have will all impact their engagement in our day-to-day instruction. I don't believe I see any questions. So if not, I'm going to pass it along to Heather.
Thanks, Marissa. All right, so now we want to get into, we've talked about engagement and just some general parts of what engagement means. Now I want to kind of get into the meat of it and how it relates to student agency and what student agency means. So whenever we have a sense of agency, we have to think of this in sort of a student way, is where they feel in control of things that happen, right, around them. And when they know that they can influence something that is happening, right? So for learners, they have to have that sense of agency or that control in some ways. That doesn't mean that we just give them choice about whatever they do all day, every day. But we want to make sure that they know that they have that power to act on their own learning. That student agency is really what is going to filter into that intrinsic motivation and having them feel like they are in control of their own learning path as well. So we're talking about allowing, again, students to make choices and decisions. That, again, does not mean that you can need to give them a sense of choice over 100 different things to do in your classroom. You just need to have it be a part of and give them maybe one or two things that they might be able to choose from. If you just even give them 2 ways to show their learning, or even just making little choices here and there in their day, but it does not necessarily need to be the whole crux of your lesson. You want students to be able to have some sense of control over it, have an active role. Goal setting can help, taking ownership of their learning. I've heard from so many folks when it comes to taking ownership, and teachers and educators are like, kids aren't taking ownership of their learning. And so we kind of get into that, if you're not going to take ownership, I'm going to teach. And if you're not learning, then that's on you. And we need to kind of think about it differently. Because we need to figure out why they're not taking ownership. How do we make them feel responsible? How do we help them be more confident in their learning? This here is the castle wheel for social and emotional learning. We wanted to make sure to include this in the slides today, because a lot of times when it comes to student agency, it has to do with their social emotional engagement in class. We always talk about like, are kids not learning it? And you know, like how they're learning compared to how they're feeling in the classroom. And we try to separate those out, but we know that if a student is coming in and they, in some social emotional way, are not ready to learn, then that is going to affect their learning. Anything that we're teaching them is going to go kind of by the wayside because they're not quite ready for it. So we wanted to include this here. That has to do with sort of that awareness and understanding that they can be part of their own learning. This graphic here, I'm just going to go through sort of one at a time here. So when we're talking about student agency, one of the biggest things that we can do for students is set goals, right? They can help set goals. We can set goals for them. It doesn't have to be necessarily individualized, personalized learning, but even if you're going through a lesson and you're saying, okay, here is what we're going to be learning today, and here's the goal for all of you today, just so that they can understand what the goals are for a particular lesson or just in your class in general. It gives them an awareness of what they're learning. It gives them a little bit of intentionality to what they're doing. And you want to make sure that students really understand where they're going with things. So that next one, oh, there we go. My computer is, something's acting up today. So the next one is that initiate action towards those goals. So again, this is where that choice and voice, freedom, some sort of autonomy, it's so interesting with that, you know, the self-initiation of ownership and all of that. I was just talking to my daughter the other day. She's in high school and she was talking about a project, and they had to do a project. And at first the teacher was very open with what they were able to do for this particular project. And it was really confusing for kids because they were so used to having like everything listed that needed to be on a poster or everything listed. And the teacher gave them a rubric. And Marissa and I were talking about it even earlier today, my daughter was still, even with the rubric, was like, there's no checklist for the things that we need to be able to do on this poster. And we talked a lot about that she had the goal and it was her interpretation, and she was using and applying what she had learned in that classroom for her own interpretation and own sort of presentation for that. And this is the mindset that we want to be able to get students in as early as possible, is that they have that freedom and that autonomy. And they're not like my daughter, who's a senior in high school, saying, I'm not really sure what I'm doing here because there's no checklist for me to be able to make sure that I have everything. And she has complete independence. So it's just a different way of thinking of things. This next one, reflect and revise. So we're giving them that ability to say, okay, I've done this. Here's how I'm doing. They're able to self-reflect. You're able to talk with them, and they're in control of how they're updating things. They have that grit and perseverance and ability to say, okay, I can continue to make this better, and I have opportunities for that, more importantly. And then the next one is to internalize that self-efficacy. So that is the growth mindset that we all sort of, we hear the words and we're like, okay, yeah, Growth mindset. But it is that empowerment for students to be able to know that much of what they're going to be doing in the classroom, certainly we as educators are going to help them understand and grow their knowledge, but they are also just as important in the learning process as the teaching is from you, and that they're going to learn from one another as well. So just to kind of think about this in a little bit different way, when we talk about engagement, we spark their interest, right? So that's the spark where we get, pull them in, and agency is that sort of fire that keeps that burning. So we need that engagement to be able to have agency. One does not really exist much without the other. This particular slide, there was a study, it was called Beyond Standardized Test Scores. Really, it's not, to me, when I look at this and the research, this was looking at closing the gap of learning for students. It was done in 2015, so it was a while ago, but all of this information, it's a huge study. I think this was 118 pages or something. The link is right here if you wanted to get to the link. But it talked about different components and agency-related factors that influence our teaching and student learning. They were looking at happiness, future orientation, meaning like, what does this mean for me in my future? And really relating it to what students are learning in the classroom and how it's going to help them later. And then it was interesting on some of these components that we were using in our classroom and some of these things that we were doing in our classroom that actually impacted students negatively on this. So the gist of this is, when we're talking about student expressions of agency, if a student has agency, things that you will see are punctuality. Again, that can be compliance as well, but if a student has agency, these are some of the things. You'll see good conduct, you'll see really good effort, they will seek help when they need it, and they'll be conscientious. If a student lacks agency, they're faking the effort. Those are those kids as you're walking around the room and they're like, yeah, did you get it? Everybody got that same answer. And they're like, oh yeah. And then you look at their paper and they don't have anything on it. Not trying as hard, giving up on work, waiting for you to come over to help them without even trying, and basically avoiding tasks altogether. We have to be very careful of this, because as teachers, sometimes we look at things and we say, well, they don't seem to be really engaged in the lessons, but they're passing. And we say, that's fine. So we want to be a little bit more aware of that to make sure that they're not just complying, and that they're actually continuing to grow their knowledge and to make those connections that are needed. So through this particular studies, they came up with the 7 C's to develop agency. So the first one is care, right? So we want to make sure that students know that we care about them. So we want to be attentive and sensitive. But don't coddle, there's that fine line, especially as teachers in younger grades. We want to make sure that we're caring for students, but we're also allowing them to be independent learners and to be able to kind of have a little bit of perseverance there. The confer, so this next one has to do with making sure that we're looking at student perspectives, allowing them to speak, and making sure that we're making good use of our time within the classroom, and that we're purposeful about when we want kids to be able to collaborate or work together. This next one is captivate, right? We want to have that relevance. We want to pull students in. We want that spark, right? To be able to say, oh, this is interesting to me, or, oh, I understand how this, relates to what I'm learning and where I'm going with my learning. The clarify, this is making sure that there's no confusion with students, that we have feedback for them. And it is, we go into a lot of classrooms and we see sometimes people, without realizing it, just telling students the answer, like looking on a page and saying, okay, you're doing multiplication, and maybe the multiplication is 5 times 5. And you say, oh, remember, 5 times 5 is 25, not 24. Right? So we're telling them the answer, but we want to make sure that we're clearing up confusion as we're doing that, and not just sort of doing the work for them. And there's kind of a fine balance there. The next one is consolidate. So summarizing what they're learning, consolidating the learning, restating what they are learning. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the learning objectives and learning targets and how those can help, but making sure we're constantly talking about and making those connections for students so that they know what they're learning and, again, where they're going. Challenge, we want rigor, we want persistence for students. They, anticipate where you might get that, and make sure that you're helping students persist. So we see a lot in classrooms as we go in that there's challenge papers or things like that. And sometimes kids will just sit with a challenge paper and say, well, I'm done and I'm not really sure how to do this. So we want to set students up as much as possible to be able to persist in that and to at least try, and give them some ways in which to do that. And the last one is our classroom management. Right. So if we go into a particular lesson and we're not really ready for that lesson, or we haven't prepared enough, we all know we've done it. And that particular lesson in that day is a disaster. Right. So we want to make sure that we're ready for that. We also know that there's certain classes where the classroom management can get really tricky. And you have some classes where student behaviors are then prohibiting others from learning. So we want to make sure that we're respectful, that we are, it's almost like we assume that students know what they need to do within a classroom to be on task, and what they need to do to be able to be good, conscientious students, but sometimes that needs direct instruction. I see it a lot when you get up into the upper elementary or middle school or high school, where we assume students know how to collaborate. We assume they know how to work together, but they actually don't necessarily know how to do that. And we need to explicitly teach them about that. And it is constantly not just letting behaviors go by the wayside, but being on top of it and making sure that it is crystal clear the way that you want students to behave and to be in the classroom. So some routines or activities that are we want to make sure that we're putting into our activities and routines is support the understanding of each of our students to see themselves as a learner, to understand what their strengths, their challenges, and all of that is. We know students have specific preferences. Can we incorporate every single student's preferences and exactly, like what we know that they like into our classroom? No. But we know that if it's an easy thing, we can kind of incorporate that, whether it be we use whatever sport that some student likes within a word problem, or that we kind of make that connection there. We want to also look at our learning environment and make sure that there's opportunities for challenges. Marissa and I saw Graham Fletcher, and we loved what he said about that some students, instead of being high or low, that instead of using those terms, that some students are at the beginning stages of their learning and some students are further along in their learning. So we want to make sure that we're challenging all students as well. And to be able to have students have a voice in setting goals and expressing needs of what they might have in the classroom. This here is there's a link to it right here. It's one of the resources that you'll get. When we're talking about student agency, we just wanted to incorporate this in here. This is, it's quite a few pages, but it's talking a little bit about classroom environment and things that you can look at for, what your environment looks like to be able to help encourage student agency and to make sure that students are engaged. This is the access to learning portion. So just a lot of great information here of things to think about for engagement and how your classroom can be set up and things to really focus on to make sure that we're getting all of our students where they need to be and in that mindset to be able to learn. So we thought that this would be helpful. It's in a couple of places in our slides here. So we just thought it would be something you could take a peek at. This, when we talk about getting started with building student agency, one of the things that we're talking about is, again, those clear expectations for your students. The second one, to make sure that students understand why they're learning and what they're learning. Also building community through culturally responsive practices. Community is huge for all students to feel like they belong in there and that they have the ability to learn, just like Marissa was saying earlier, is essential for students. Looking at conversation starters to build student agency. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. And this last one is working with other teachers and people within your building and discussing some of the strategies that you have and sharing it with your colleagues will be a game changer. For these next couple of slides, I do want to look at number 2 here and make sure that everybody has a little bit of information here about how we can ensure that students understand what they're learning and why. It is one of the biggest ways to have students have agency within their learning is they have to know what they're doing and why they're doing it. When it comes to educational research, John Hattie is somebody who's done thousands of studies. You can kind of see down here all of the different studies that he's done. These are all the ways in which we can increase student learning. So these are negative effects on student learning, and then all of these are the positive effects on student learning. And you can see the star where it says student expectations. So when students know why they're learning it, when they have learning targets that aren't just posted on the board that you never refer to, but when they truly understand what they're doing, they understand what their success criteria is, and they know why they are learning it, they have more than 1 year of growth for a year of learning. So that's sort of the gold star, right? We want for 1 year of input and 1 year of teaching. If I teach 5th grade, I want students to make 1 year of growth. But when students truly understand what their expectations are, and we're talking about like sort of filling those gaps that students have, if you're really dialed into that and students know, they can make 1.3 years worth of growth. So it's something that we want to make sure that we have down pat and are constantly ensuring that students know why they're learning it and what they're doing. So when we talk about success criteria, again, that supports student ownership, right? We want to make sure that students know what they're learning. They know what they're learning and how that is having evidence of where they're going to. So we're setting goals. We know this is what we need to do for this particular day or next week or so, and students all along the way know where they are on that continuum to be able to say, this is how I know I am successful. So we want to make sure that students know where they're going and how to get there. And this is also taking the emphasis off of not just getting a specific grade, but showing a specific amount of understanding. So student success criteria can help students do that, and it helps them become more engaged in the learning process. So when we're looking at determining our learning goals or success criteria, both teachers and students need to be able to answer the following questions. So what are we learning? How are we learning it? Why are we learning it? Why does it matter? How do we know we have learned it? And where and when will we use this learning again? This is, I do a lot with math, and talking about, okay, this is what you've learned in the past, and we're now building on that, and we're going to be learning this now, because in the future, this is what we're going to need you to do. It's the same thing with language arts or science. A lot of what we're talking about is problem-solving skills, right? And being able to increasingly and with more difficulty gain those problem-solving skills throughout. So learning targets, again, describes what you want students to know and be able to do. And the success criteria tells them when they are successful in acquiring that knowledge. This is an ELA example that has to do with a specific standard. It tells you what the learning target is, the task, and then you can see the success criteria there as well. Same thing for math. We put a math success criteria. Here's your learning target. And then here is the sort of continuum of success for them. This is a big word. Marissa and I were talking about this as we were creating this particular slide here. And it is, I cannot yet. It's not no, you can't. It's I can't yet. We want to use that asset-based way of talking so that students continuously have the knowledge that they will be able to acquire it. It's not that you're never going to know it. I haven't seen any questions yet, so I'm going to keep going. I'm looking at the time here. So we're gonna move along here. When we're talking about student agency, we also want to talk about using data to help students understand where they are. It helps us understand, and we want to share that with them as well. So they're not passively participating, that they're understanding where they are. They're able to help monitor their progress and reflect on their learning. And it also helps them take control of their learning. And it's not just for while they're in school, it's for when they get out of school, and we want to make sure they have those skills. So here's my little graphic here about data and feedback. It should be timely and relevant. So we want to, again, make sure that we use that data as a resource to cultivate that student learning and to motivate students to take that responsibility and analyzing and empowering themselves to monitor their academic achievement. Here's sort of a graph that we have here. So methods of utilizing data. We can co-create student goals. Having students be a part of creating their own learning goals is important in anywhere. I mean, kindergarten students can create their own learning goals as well. It just looks a little different. We want to co-design our learning profiles, so tracking progress and being able to celebrate successes and all of that, and then reviewing one-on-one conferences, partnering with students and continuing to reflect with ongoing growth. All right. So when we talk about building student agency and having them own their own data, again, it's not that you just start it that way. It's a gradual release. And then we want them to then be able to navigate it and be more independent as they go. Right now, it's been very difficult for students to be independent in their learning. We're doing everything we can to try to scaffold and do as much as we can for students because we want them to be successful. I do think that there are times in which we are helping students more than we think we are, and it's creating sort of this overall lack of being independent in our own learning sort of journey. So again, when we're talking about ownership of data, we're talking about building autonomy and choice and understanding. It's making sure that it's clear how you're going to track the data, what the goals are, and then we say individual pathways here. It doesn't mean that you have different things for all students to be doing in your classroom, but for them, it is something that relates to them in their learning. It doesn't mean it's different than everybody else's, but they know where they need to go. The next one is the role of assessment in this, right? We all know that we have to assess students. We have our learning goals and our objectives. They need to align with what the assessment is going to be and what our teaching and learning activities are. And we need to make sure that we're gathering evidence of student learning. So many times, a lot of that is in our head, but we also need to have that feedback that we can give students that shows their progress as well, and that's where assessment falls in. For us right now, what I want to talk about is this feedback and making sure that we are giving that feedback in a timely manner. So these are the 4 W's of assessment: when, what, who, and why. We've got your formative assessments, your interim, and your summative assessments. And what I want to point out here is all of these are benefiting your students, you as teachers, and we want to make sure that we have multiple checkpoints. The biggest thing that I can't stress enough is that you need to give students that feedback. They need to understand where they are in their learning, and you need to give them some control of that, which means you may not necessarily give an assessment just one time. It may be that they're able to show something in another way or in a different way. So you want to think about all of that as you're planning to say, what is my goal here? Is my goal to give this assessment to give a grade? And if it is, and you're not going to do anything with that data, then it doesn't necessarily make sense. We have to kind of stop the I'm only giving this assessment for grading. We want to move towards that. We're giving assessments to inform our instruction, to inform our students, and to make sure that we're all getting where we need to go. This is that we wanted to put a little bit in here about test apathy. We've been hearing people talk about this a lot, where students have so many times that they have assessments that now they're just clicking through. So we thought this graphic sort of showed that a little bit. Again, I just want to talk about some reminders for you as educators and teachers. Students follow your lead. If you are stressed, they will be stressed, especially when it comes to state assessment or anything like that. Your attitude towards it is going to be their attitude towards it. You want to make sure that you're clear with your intentions for testing. And again, that isn't, well, we just have to do it because it's required. We have to come up with a little bit more understanding than that. Again, don't just assess for a score or grade. Even your state assessments, especially SAT, PSAT, New Hampshire SASP, all of that can be used for you to understand how well that your teaching practices have been doing, whether you look at it historically, whether you look at how students are doing now. You can always figure out where students may be lacking in skills or doing really well in things. So again, we want to use that data to inform our instructions and see where students are on the learning continuum. Again, some teachers have kind of thrown assessments by the wayside, which is not necessarily what we're talking about either, but we want to think about the biggest things here are the things that are highlighted. What is the format of the assessment? What is the timing of the assessment? What content do we have on there? And what is the clear purpose for students and making sure that they're understanding and improving in their learning? This is a video. We're not going to watch it. But if you are working with a large number of students, or even yourself, Marissa and I watched this video and found this video with our friend and our colleague, Jacqueline, and it is something that I think it would be really good for you to show your students or for you to look at some point. So we wanted to put it in here. We like to put as many resources in as possible. We're not going to do that. Next. Okay. I'm going to keep going, Marissa. You just feed me those questions if you have any.
We're good.
Thanks. The next thing is classroom environment as the third teacher. This is we just want to make you aware of some of these things that we're looking at. So we're looking at that cognitive, emotional, and behavioral engagement that we were talking about. This particular philosophy here says that there are three teachers of children in the classroom. So one is the adults, two are other children, and third is that physical environment. We really want to make sure that the environment is helping students with their learning. You don't need that Pinterest classroom or TikTok famous classroom, but you do want to make sure that it is supporting this cognitive, emotional, and behavioral engagement for students. And then looking at materials within your classroom, they should be intentionally placed and introduced to students or co-created with students. I can't tell you how many classrooms I have been in and the walls are completely blank, or the walls are filled with information that it's really hard to kind of sift through and figure out what's important there. So there's a happy medium there. When we talk about the physical environment, how you arrange your furniture, does it allow for collaboration or active learning? Are your materials easy to get to and stored? Again, that wall space, are there anchor charts or decorations or whatever it is, but not overstimulating? And then this is one that I love. There are so many times where we forget to showcase our student work. Sometimes, especially in elementary school, it's out in the hallway, but it's also good to have a place in your classroom where they can see their work as well. When it comes to emotional classroom environment, we're talking about that tone, right? This is a big one. Is your voice and student voices, are they balanced? Or is it all your voice and very little of theirs? If it's all yours and very little of theirs, you got to do something about that. Students need to be able to collaborate and to be able to talk about and ask questions. Is the noise level conducive to learning? Is risk-taking valued, named, and modeled? This is where you will allow all of us have those students who don't talk at all, and we want to make sure that we create an environment where they feel like it's okay to do that. Sometimes we have that nonverbal communication where you look at a child or you give them a certain signal and they know what that means. We can establish these rituals, greetings, weekly meetings, right? We want to make sure that there's positive affirmations for students. We're praising what they're getting, even if they aren't getting it all the way. And then again, we want to make sure that the growth and successes are celebrated. When it comes to cognitive, again, high expectations. Kids are not coming in quite, for the quite as high as we felt like they used to be. They're coming in a little bit lower, but we want to have those high expectations communicated to them orally and in writing, right? We want to make sure that there's anchor charts or checklists. We want to make sure that we have consequences for specific behaviors or specific actions. We have I can statements or clarified information for students to understand where their involvement is. Again, those checklists can help making learning active, and we want to make sure that we cultivate creativity. Do they have time to explore? Do they have time to work through their understanding? Or is it, okay, we've got this, now we're moving on, and I'm sorry you didn't get it. Let's move on because we have to keep going. All right. Again, this is that tier 1 look for, same thing as was before, but we thought we would show it again just because it has some of the information pertaining to the classroom environment here. The next one is planning for engagement. So looking at ways in which you can plan is going to help with student agency and engagement as well. So there are sort of 4 different frameworks or thoughts here. One is UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. We're going to talk about format, we're going to talk about planned engagement, and we're going to talk about notice and wonder. So UDL is a framework. I know a lot of us are looking at UDL and we're saying, oh, this is a whole different way I need to teach. Really, it's just taking a look at your curriculum, understanding the way students' brains work and learning sciences, and saying, I'm going to start with the end in mind, and I'm going to figure out how I'm going to get students there. And it's kind of that, a little bit of backwards design, but it's that framework where you're building your toolbox. With UDL, it has 3 different sort of areas we're looking at. Engagement is one of them, and then we have representation and action and expression. I've got the links right here for this, but what we have here too is the link here goes right to the CAST website, and you can see all of these things here. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Are all like hyperlinked, so you can take a look at this and see if there's different ways in which you might be able to be engaging students here, right? When I think about UDL for right now and for this, I would say engagement is where you definitely would need to start. This next slide, when it comes to engagement, also have it linked here. Each one of these areas here is going to also be hyperlinked. So how can you recruit interest? How can you help students sustain effort and have persistence? And how can you help students with self-regulation and being able to have strategies and be reflective in their instruction? So UDL is super helpful for that. Format is the next one. This is sort of a circular way of talking about engagement, and that is we're looking at why are we learning something and making those connections. This R and L is right-brained and left-brained. I kind of look at this more of a, we need to be able to have students make connections and attend to instruction. Then the concepts that we're talking about, we want to make sure that we have it in pictures and in words. With the skills, we want to extend what we already know and make those connections again, and then practice. So that's the how. And then the adaptations are what can we do to refine or perform. So again, we've got experiencing, watching, conceptualizing, doing. This next one is so overwhelming for a graphic, but we really liked the fact that it brought those into different quadrants here. So again, this is what the student is sort of starting with. How are we getting students to be involved? This is, okay, how are we giving the information out, and what are we doing here to be able to have students develop those skills? And then this is the performance area. Again, all of this is linked here for you as well. With the planned curricular engagement, we're talking about giving students choice, right? Multiple meanings, representations of things, and informed choices for students. Again, having that inquiry-based classroom, allowing students for a certain amount of time in your classroom to build those connections, to talk to each other. Again, explicitly teaching them how to connect with one another and to talk about academics. Also, you can have arts integration and content integration. So looking at maybe the visual arts or where movement might be able to be used, have other ways to show understanding, creating that content and what the standards are having us teach, and then making sure that we have, and when we can, introducing that pop culture or having it figure out how we can sort of hook students in and how we can really apply it to real life situations. This here is notice and wonder. If you haven't done this before, a lot of math teachers have done this. But what this allows us to do is it allows us to cultivate student conversations. So basically what you do is you have a picture up there and you talk about what you notice or wonder, and it gets students talking and collaborating, and it can be a really easy entry point for students to be able to start having those conversations. We put the notice and wonder links up here, so you can get to any of these. They're really fun, and some of this has some other information about notice and wonder as well. But that's how you can start to think about engaging even your quiet learners, is these sort of not high stakes. What do you notice? What do you wonder about this? This here is just a reminder that a lot of times when we're having students are having trouble with something, it's because we need to shift the entry points for things. Sometimes we're looking at a whole class novel. How might we be able to shift that? Sometimes we're looking at a specific task or a specific context. All of these things we can just start thinking about. How can we figure out how to shift those entry points for students and make it more engaging? All right. I'm sorry, we're 2 minutes over and we've got probably 4 or 5 minutes. We're going to keep going.
Awesome. So we're going to talk about the importance of the reciprocal relationship. Really, this is that balance between student engagement and teacher engagement as well. So this is just a quote we have from John Hattie, someone we love. You've seen him. Did all that research that Heather showed earlier, which just shows us the greatest effects that we can have on student learning occur when we ourselves become learners of our own teaching and when students become their own teachers. So it's really this relationship between teaching and learning with both students and ourselves. We wanted to show how these, feed into one another. You know, we know that as teachers, it has been really difficult, recently in teaching. And we know that if students aren't coming in engaged and excited, it kind of, it feeds into our engagement and excitement for what we're teaching. And the reciprocal relationship shows that if we're not excited about what we're teaching, then our students aren't going to be either. And they feed each other. They're in this rotating circle that we need to make sure that we're engaged. We are, agents of our own learning, and our students are as well. This is a Venn diagram that we put in really just at the center is student engagement, and how all of this feeds into that is, our students, us as teachers, and the content. And so when we think about students and the content, we need to make sure, as we've stated, that it's relevant to our students, that we've shown, why they need to know this skill, the real world process, the real world situations, why they might need to know it in the future. And also for students and teachers, our relationships that we build with our students are super important, really kind of that core of engagement. And then for us in the content, making sure that we're delivering it in a way that shows, competence, that we truly understand what we're teaching and therefore can help students in the best way. And really these all overlap because these all feed into student engagement. It's important. Our relationships, the relevance of what we're teaching, and our competence within that is going to help with student engagement. We wanted to add this in there just to show we've been talking a lot about student motivation and what students need in order to become intrinsically motivated. And, that works for the same of teachers themselves as well. We need to make sure that we, have a connection to our school community, that we're engaged and excited, and that we have, we feed our interests and talents. So everything that we've been talking about with students, it goes both ways for us as well. We have our safety needs, we have our growth needs, and we have autonomous learning that needs to be done as well as our students. We've added in 2 videos here. Again, we're not going to watch them, just for you to have that you can watch. This is a video that just talks about, how, the dimensions of engagement and how we can model engagement for students so that students are able to re-engage when they realize that they aren't engaged. So it's really just talking about, some research that they've done and how there are these different dimensions of engagement, and how we as teachers, if we have our own passions, we can pass those on, maybe not the specific content knowledge, but just gaining insight into, that nature of being caught up in learning. This is a second video just showing that this group of teachers have really supported each other through some peer feedback and how much that they've grown and how it has allowed them to learn so much. This is that John Hattie quote that we put in the beginning there, that we become kind of, learners of our own teaching, and this feedback can help with that. So just some videos for you that you can look into afterwards. You're going to get, all these resources once you get the link to the video and the slide deck, that all of these, there's also a resource Padlet we have for you with tons of resources that you can use, and some books that if you're looking to learn more about building student agency, you can take a look at.
Yeah, Jacqueline did a really great job with this Padlet, so check it out.
And lastly, we just wanted to kind of wrap it up with, really asking ourselves these sorts of questions, because this is going to really build student agency in our classrooms and build that engagement. And, it starts with us too. So, it's that reciprocal relationship. Are we ready to learn from our students as well as students learning from us? Are students acting as leaders or followers? What skills do they need in order to express themselves? What steps will I take to implement change? How can I monitor impact on student engagement and outcomes, and so much more? So really, we want to just wrap up with, let's ask ourselves these questions. These are really going to help us build, everything that we kind of talked about today, that confidence in our students where they can really act as, members in their own learning. I don't believe I see any Q&As, but feel free to ask. I know we're at the end. And there's Heather's email, my email, also Kristen Crawford from the NHED. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at any time. And thank you so much for sticking with us. We know we went a little over time, so we really appreciate it. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.